Hello and welcome back to the Chelmsford News Show. I'm Tom Christiano. Well, tonight I'm very excited because we have a wonderful person who is running for state representative in the 14th Middlesex District with us tonight. His name is Simon Cataldo. Welcome, Simon.
Tom, thanks so much for having me on the show today.
Oh, it's great, Simon. I met you, a month or two ago and stuff, and I think you're working so hard to be our state rep and showing up at so many events in Chelmsford and so responsive with emails. I'm so excited at the kind of candidate you are.
Tom, thank you. I think responsiveness is a really important part of the job as a state rep.
Yeah.
Showing up is a really important part of the job because that's how you learn what people are going through, what their challenges are, what they love about the community. You can't always make assumptions. You really need to go out there and talk to people. And it's been a privilege to be able to do that over the past several months, and I'm looking forward to doing it for the rest of the campaign.
Yes, and speaking of the campaign, the primary day is what, September 6th?
That's right.
On a Tuesday?
That's right.
So, and then, why don't we start with just mentioning that's precincts 7 through 11 in Chelmsford, right, that you would be representing in the 14th?
That's exactly right. And it's the new precinct 7 through 11 because they've changed the numbering as a result of the census. So if anyone is unsure, they can visit our website. They can visit the town's website just so they know where they live. But 7 through 11 is the old 1, 4, 5, and 9.
I said, yeah. But I think it's almost half of Chelmsford, right? I think 7 through 11, because we have 11 total precincts now. You're almost half of the community, which is great.
That's right. It's a much bigger portion of Chelmsford than the old 14th Middlesex District, which was only 2 precincts.
Yes, yeah. And in addition to that, you'll be covering what towns?
It's Carlisle, most of Concord, and part of Acton.
I see, wonderful. So, Simon, for us to begin the show, could you tell us about your background, your education, maybe something about your family, your work, that kind of thing?
Sure, Tom, and thanks for that opportunity to introduce myself. So we moved from Arlington to West Concord when I was 3 years old. I have 2 little sisters. My parents, my mom was a social worker at Concord Family Services doing adoption and foster care work. My dad was an economist and an accountant. And I went to Concord Public Schools. I graduated from Concord Carlisle High School, and I loved growing up in that community. I feel that I received an excellent education. I was supported, and I grew up loving environmental issues. So I went to college to study environmental science. And I spent my free time there learning how to do retrofits of people's homes to help them save money on their utility bills, learning how to make biodiesel out of used fry oil. And I was basically a big chemistry nerd. So I moved to Harlem, New York City. I joined Teach for America to be a chemistry teacher, except that 4 days before school started, the principal introduced me as the new 7th and 8th grade special education math teacher. And I approached him later that day. He told me that I could either keep that job or he'd fire me because the real special ed math teacher had quit earlier that day.
Oh my God.
So this was in 2008.
Yeah, 2008.
And it was in the midst of the financial crisis. There was not a lot of opportunities for somebody like me to find another job.
Right, 2008, yeah.
And so I decided to stay. And I was totally unprepared to teach special education in Harlem, and I really struggled at the beginning. But I stayed, and several months in, I decided to take a Hail Mary and try taking my worst behaving boys in my class onto the handball court beside school and teach them lacrosse. And everything changed. They latched onto that sport. They began to find some positive self-identity. They started to respect themselves and each other and me more. And fast forward to the end of the year, and my students had the highest gains on the state math exam in the school district for former low-level performers and the highest scores we'd had for special education students at that school.
Wow.
And from there, I stayed for 3 years as a special education teacher. I built our little program and then incorporated a nonprofit called Harlem Lacrosse. Since then, Harlem Lacrosse has grown into a national organization. We're in 5 cities in New York, Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. We have over 60 full-time employees, a budget of nearly $7 million. And we've grown that organization just on the belief that if students who are at risk for academic decline or dropout have consistent mentors, tutors, and coaches in their lives all day, every day, that they'll succeed. And the students have shown us that that's the case. Yes. So I've spent kind of half of my career growing that organization into what it is today and ushering it through periods of economic uncertainty. We did not lay off a single person during the pandemic. Wow. And doing that work has been a great honor. The second half of my career, I went to law school. I went to the University of Virginia, clerked for a federal judge, and then went into the U.S. Justice Department into a small section that was exclusively devoted to combating public corruption. So I prosecuted a variety of public officials, law enforcement officers, a judge, elected politicians for a variety of federal criminal offenses. My first trial in federal court was Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Arizona, who later, after we won the trial, became President Trump's first pardon. So now I'm back here with my wife, Chessie. We're raising our two sons, and we're loving living in this area. But we also understand that there are a lot of challenges that the community is facing right now. And I'm running because I think that my generation has a responsibility to take a leadership role in the challenges that we're facing. And I'm really excited to be running for office and hopefully, if I'm elected, delivering really effective representation to the residents of the district.
Well, if you continue the way you've been with responding to emails, phone calls, showing up to many Chelmsford events, like you were here last Saturday at a rally to support the Chelmsford Center for the Arts. You came in, from Concord, drove here, and stayed there the entire 2 hours or 1.5 hours, and talked to so many people. That's the kind of representation we love here in Chelmsford. So you're starting out great, Simon.
Well, I loved being there, Tom, and I came with my sons. I was solo parenting that day, and we went up to the little drums that are there, and we met some other kids, and two slightly older boys taught my 3-year-old how to play the drums, and it was fun. And I've just met so many people who are really, really committed to retaining that resource for the town. And the Chelmsford Center for the Arts is something that the state has helped support financially, and I commend the legislators who made that happen. And I think we need to continue to have people who are committed to bringing resources from the state to our communities in the district and making sure that the state is a responsible and powerful financial partner for our community. Yes. There are a lot of resources that the state has, and it's the representative's job to make sure that we get those resources.
And I know you're going to try hard to get us as many resources as you can, because I've talked to you many times about issues and about bringing funding into Chelmsford, like even for the Chelmsford Center for the Arts. You'll maybe try to help us get some money there for utilities and heating the place and so many other things. So that's wonderful, Simon. But the first thing you have to do is win that primary on September 6th. And by the way, I am hosting another candidate, Vivian Burchell, I believe is the last name, in a couple of weeks. So I'll try to be as fair as possible to all the Democratic candidates.
Absolutely.
That I'm wearing. And if I have time, I'll interview the Republican candidates as well, or independents.
Absolutely.
So it'll be interesting meeting Vivian as well in a couple of weeks. So that's great. So shall we talk about some of the issues that you like, your top priorities? And
Tom, I think, one of the things that we need to do to start rebuilding our trust in democracy is give people a choice.
Yes.
That is so important. We see around the world right now people fighting just to have that right of self-determination, of being able to have a choice. So I commend any candidate who's willing to step up and raise their hand and take that attention upon themselves and say, look, this is what I'm offering to you as a politician or as a legislator, as a leader in government. And I think we need more people running for office. I was just at the League of Women Voters Forum in Chelmsford a few days ago, and there were select board candidates and school committee candidates and library trustee candidates. And I was really inspired to see these people stepping up, offering their ideas, introducing their backgrounds and their priorities. I think it's really important to give people a choice, and I'm happy to be one of those choices.
Yes. Thank you, Simon. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Our own election here in Chelmsford is going to be on April 5th, so we'll know the results of that pretty soon. And then the primary is September 6th, and the national election for the state, the first Tuesday in November? After, say you win the primary, then you run against, say, a Republican, if there is one, or independent?
Then that will be in November, yes.
In November?
In the competitive race that I'm focused on right now is the Democratic primary.
Yeah, September 6th, right? And wonderful. And so shall we talk about a few issues that you might cover? Great. Well, we talked a little about local aid. Is there anything else you could say about getting Chelmsford more local aid and helping our schools and
Absolutely.
Like
so local aid it's a broad topic, and perhaps we can just start with local aid for education.
Okay.
So I think that this affects the community on a number of levels. It affects obviously the quality of our public education and the quality of our facilities, but it also just affects the fiscal health of the town. Yes. And we know, and it's been well publicized at this point, that the local aid projections for Chelmsford and other towns, taking into account current rates of inflation, actually have local aid decreasing. We're not going to be doing enough for our towns as we need to be doing. And that's really important because town governments are the closest to the people. Yes. And so whether it's for education or in Chapter 70 or Chapter 90 funds for our roads or anything else, we need to make sure that the state's being a good financial partner so that our town can provide the essential services that towns are best equipped to provide. Yes. Our town select board, our town school committees, they're closest to the situation. They know what the towns need. And so our state representatives need to be out there advocating, in my view, for more local aid. Yes. Everyone in Chelmsford, I'm sure everybody watching knows that Chelmsford has not gotten a fair shake in Chapter 70 funds. And it would be my responsibility to do whatever I can to make sure that that becomes more equitable in favor of Chelmsford, whether it's with statewide apportionment or whether it's with earmarking funds for specific projects that Chelmsford needs. Yeah. It's unacceptable, in my view, that the newest school building in Chelmsford was built in the 1970s. That is not a way of properly and appropriately funding our schools when our school buildings are deteriorating and we're not going to be able to keep up the quality of education. Yes. But the Chapter 70 funding from the state, it doesn't only affect the families and the children who are in school now. It affects the entire town because about half of the town's budget goes to the schools. And if those costs rise and rise, it's going to take away funding for other essential town services, yes. Things like water, sewer, roads, yes. Utilities, and so it really affects everybody, and it affects people of all age groups, of all backgrounds, at every level of the economic spectrum. Yes. So Chapter 70 is where I'd start, and local aid generally. Yeah. I think there are some other ways that the state can really be a better partner, though, for our towns. One of them is the water challenges we're facing right now. So up on Richardson Road, we've found significant levels of PFAS chemicals in the drinking water supply, and that's something that we're seeing all over the district. We need the state to step in and be a real partner in the solution for that, yes. In detecting PFAS wherever it is in Chelmsford or anywhere else in the district, yes. In treating it and disposing of it. Yes. It can't be incumbent solely upon the local water districts in Chelmsford or the other towns to do that. We need the state's project management expertise and the state's money to come in and fix those. Otherwise, it's not going to be financially feasible for the towns to do that themselves.
I see, yes. Well, wonderful. And so I guess you're saying, too, that you could try to help us get more money. If we want to build a new school, hopefully to get as much as possible from the state, right?
That's
because
right.
It's my understanding that lower average income communities, like, for example, Lowell or Lawrence, get a much higher percentage of the money from the state to build a new school, maybe up to even 90%, right? Whereas a middle-class community with more income like Chelmsford, it's hard for us to get anywhere near that percentage, right? To build a new school.
So I think we need to keep, that's right. I think we need to keep everything on the table in terms of how we help out Chelmsford, whether that's forming partnerships with other legislators who are interested in raising the amount of state support for local school districts statewide, or whether it's any kind of alteration or earmark that comes to the town of Chelmsford or other towns in the district to make sure that we're advancing public education in our district. There's another school that's not in Chelmsford, though, that we should talk about because it affects Chelmsford, and I think it affects a lot of our priorities, which is Neshoba Valley Tech.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So we have some really wonderful vocational high schools in our that serve our district, Minuteman, Neshoba Valley Tech. And I think that those schools have a really important role in addressing a couple of issues that we have right now. One is just economic equity, the ability for somebody who doesn't want to go to college to go directly into a trade and earn a living and support his or her family.
Yes.
But also, we have these very aggressive and admirable green energy goals.
Yes.
Currently, we do not have the workforce to actually implement the infrastructure changes that we need. So we have some great Voc Tech schools.
Yes.
We have $9 billion coming to Massachusetts to help fund our infrastructure programs, but we don't have the workforce. So from a economic standpoint, from a workforce standpoint, and from an environmental standpoint, I think we need to be more properly supporting our Voc Tech schools. Help people go into the trades. Right now, Tom, about 80% of graduates from our Voc Tech schools are going straight to college. So in a way, that's great, right? But in another way, it's not so great because we need those grads to be going into the trades. If you've tried to get a plumber or an electrician to come into your house to fix something recently, I guarantee you've had a hard time because the average age of a plumber or an electrician right now in Massachusetts is in their late 50s. And so we are losing those valued tradespersons. We need to be putting them into the workforce and making sure that that option is available so that we can do these infrastructure projects that are going to help us reach our green energy goals.
Well, Simon, this is the first I've heard of this statistic. About 80% of the vocational school graduates are going on to college rather than going into plumbing, electrician, carpentry, mechanics. That's where they would even be better off doing that because thinking you're going to go to college and you get a beautiful white-collar job and you're going to make a lot of money, it's not going to be that way now and in the future with more automation, more artificial intelligence. Those jobs are not going to be there, and they're going to be so disappointed because they spent all that money, too, of going to college for maybe 2 to 4 or 5 years and coming out and not being able to find a job. Whereas if they went to the Voc school, learn their plumbing and mechanics and all these other things, they would get a job later, a good paying job too.
And I commend our Voc schools and the leadership at those schools for preparing their students to do whatever they want. And it's wonderful that a lot of them want to go to college. I think my concern is that there are people who ought to or want to be going to those schools, but they're not getting in because it is very competitive in many cases. And we need to be properly resourcing those schools so that anyone who wants to go to a trade can go to a Voc Tech school and help Massachusetts economy and their families. And so it's an equity issue, it's an education issue, and ultimately it's an environmental issue because we do not have enough pipe fitters, plumbers, electricians to build out all the green infrastructure that we're going to need in order to reach our environmental goals.
I think, and I'm just learning this now about the admissions and you got to take tests or whatever to get in. It's very competitive. I think this is wrong, Simon. I just don't think it's the way to go. I think they should choose people who really might want to become an electrician, would love to become a mechanic, would love to become all these other trades. Plumber is very important too. And let those people in first rather than those who get a higher grade score.
Well, it's hard to know, Tom. It's hard to know who's going to want to go down what path. I think the fact that a lot of those students are going to college is indicative of the quality of education that people are getting at those schools. But I think we need to open it up to more people, perhaps more slots. The trades are going to be a really important part of the environmental equation that we have in Massachusetts, and they're going to be an important part of making sure that everybody can participate in our economy in the years ahead.
Yes. Well, maybe better counseling of these students who want to go to the vocational school before they go in, and while they're in there, to talk to them about what I just mentioned about you'll probably get a job if you learn how to be a plumber, an electrician. If you go to college, it's going to cost a fortune, and you may not get the job that you're thinking of. It may not be that fulfilling for you to come out and to try to get a white-collar job, and then I tell you, a lot of them are going to be disappearing. So I really think they're going the wrong way. But I understand what you're saying, Simon, but I really think we need to redirect that. And if we need more seats there in the vocational schools, maybe we need to build more of those schools rather than some of the traditional schools, or both, if possible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It sounds like we need more vocational schools, and real ones where they'll learn how to be plumbers, electricians, and pipe fitters. And trade them for the solar energy and the wind energy and all these things that are going to come into the forefront in the future.
And you know, Tom, I think it's really exciting that we're getting a lot of money. As I said, $9 billion from the federal government coming to Massachusetts. This is a really important time for our district to have effective advocacy at the state level, because everybody is going to want those resources for needed projects in their district, whether it's the quality of our drinking water, whether it's the sewer infrastructure, which is a major challenge right now in Chelmsford. There have been 2 recent, very significant leaks that we were discussing recently with some town leadership, and that is something that the state can come in and help with. Those funds are dedicated towards infrastructure projects like that. If we want to have safe drinking water, make sure that our ground is not polluted, make sure that our sewer system is not leaking, that we don't have more hookup moratoriums where we can't have more economic development. If we want all that, then we're going to need the state to be a really good partner for us, and that's what I'm interested in doing as a state rep.
Yes. And to remind everybody that the primary date is September 6th, right? You're running for state representative in the Democratic primary for the 14th Middlesex District. And you mentioned a little bit, or we want to talk a little about mail-in balloting and absentee voting. What do you think about that? We don't have the problem here that they have in Texas, do they? Or other places where they're not allowing these absentee voters or mail-in ballots to count?
Well, Tom, this is what I'll say about that. The voting system in Massachusetts is far less available and progressive than I think many people assume. And I was in Boston, as I mentioned. With Harlem Lacrosse, we have programming in Boston, and I was in Dorchester at a middle school, and it was a voting location in the spring. And there were people for the presidential primary wrapped around the building. It was the type of thing that you would expect to see in other states, perhaps down south, but not in Massachusetts. I do think that we have improvements that we can make on our voting system, and I think that we need, part of maintaining the integrity of our democracy is really actively seeking out ways to make it easier for people to legally vote. And so that means, in my view, making it easier to do mail-in balloting. Seniors or people who are homebound or people with disabilities, they should have just as easy of a time. Parents who work 2 jobs and really don't have time to go during working hours to the ballot box, having them be able to do mail-in voting. A lot of that is going to be accomplished with the Votes Act, which has passed the House and I think is likely to pass the Senate prior to the primary. But there are some things that have been left open from the current version, and we'll see if those get worked out in the legislature. Things like same-day voting registration, making it easier for people to register to vote closer to the election, I think are really important in terms of registering new voters and making our process more inclusive.
Yes, which would be wonderful. So the new bill that's passed the House is going to go to the Senate. Is it going to allow universal mail-in balloting, for example, which we don't have now, right?
Yes.
I understand we can't mail in our ballot for our local elections coming up unless we have a special authorization from the community and give them a good excuse. So it would be great if we could
Yes.
just say, I just want mail, because some people may work 2 jobs, as you said.
That's
and
right.
They just should, so that's going to go. Do you think it's going to pass, first of all?
I do think that it's going to pass in some form.
Oh, good, good.
Yes.
So will Governor Baker be the governor in office then to maybe sign it, or do we know?
I certainly hope that it happens prior to the end of Governor Baker's term.
Yes. Speaking of that, who are you favoring for governorship this next year?
Oh,
Could you say?
That's a tough question. I think that there are 2 very strong candidates who offer different experiences. I'm an undecided voter on the governor.
On the governor, yeah.
As I said at the beginning, it's really important that people have a choice.
Yes.
And I think we have a good choice for governor this time around.
Maura Healey is right, one candidate. She's our current Attorney General for the
Yes.
state.
Yes.
And she's been doing a great job as far as I could tell.
I agree.
Would you agree?
I definitely agree. She's been doing a great job both on the criminal and the civil side of the Attorney General's job, which I think is often overlooked. But she's engaged in some really important litigation with the federal government on behalf of Massachusetts.
So she would be up on primary day, September 6th as well, right?
Yes.
She has that first hurdle to get through. Right now, isn't she the odds-on favorite to win the primary?
Well, I'm not a political pundit, but I think the general thinking is that she's the favorite. But I think it's going to be a very competitive race. The other candidate, Sonia Chang Diaz, has a lot to offer and a lot of important things to say. So I think, again, the voters have a good choice in the primary, and I really hope that everybody who's a Democrat or an unenrolled voter, unenrolled voters are permitted to vote in primaries in Massachusetts. I really hope they all make the effort to vote, because our democracy is a sacred thing. We're seeing in Ukraine right now how hard people are fighting in the sacrifices they're making just to make a choice, just to be able to have that right to self-determination.
To have democracy and some freedom, and rather than have somebody, like what Putin did, he'd have somebody who plans to run against him, and he would end up poisoning certain people or killing certain people. And it's just amazing if you don't have a free country. I'm so appreciative every day of living in a free, democratic country. And those Ukrainians too, they will not quit till the last person. And God forbid, hopefully they'll have a resolution, but they won't quit. And I commend them for that. I wouldn't quit either. If somebody wants to take away my democracy, my freedom, I'll fight to the end. Just like President Zelensky is setting the example of doing.
And we have to keep working towards our democracy's strength as well. And a lot of that has to do with voting. A lot of that has to do with volunteering on a civic level. I've been so impressed with the residents of Chelmsford. So many volunteers, so many people who really care and are putting work behind that.
Yes. Well, putting work in, you're doing a great job running for state rep, Simon. We've reached the end of our show already. And do you want to ask the people at home for their vote before we go?
I would.
On September 6th?
Thanks, Tom. I hope that you'll consider voting for me, and I hope to earn your vote on September 6th. I want to be your state rep. I want to deliver effective and inclusive representation to this district. My name's Simon Cataldo, and I hope you'll vote for me on September 6th.
Well, thank you very much, Simon Cataldo, for being here. It's been a tremendous joy for me to interview you and talk to you and meet you over the past couple of months. Thank you very much, Simon.
I look forward to continuing our conversation, Tom. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you.